We often reflect on the significance of our names and the symbols they represent. I learned how their symbols are determined based on the characteristics of prophets in Islam. Yunus symbolizes courage, whereas Yusuf symbolizes patience and beauty. Our names are not merely words, but contain and represent myths, history, and culture. Architecture, like names, have meanings, represented through symbols that become significant in understanding their essential details. Architecture, like names, without the study of its symbols, becomes intangible objects with no life, as monads that never change. In 1992, 6 years before we were born, a series of violent events took place in India. During a demonstration of thousands in the city of Ayodhya in central India, Hindu nationalists climbed a 16th century mosque built by the Mughal emperor Babur, called the Babri Mosque, and with sticks, pick hammers, and pipes demolished the sacred structure to the ground. As news of the mosque demolition spread throughout India, pogroms were unleashed against Muslims in several major cities. Uncountable numbers of people were displaced. Muslims living within major cities resettled to Muslim neighborhoods, leaving their homes present in unsafe areas, away from the tragic shift of communal violence and politics that India was now seeing. As a result of this carnage, Muslims took this responsibility to preserve and exhibit symbols that represent their history, culture, and identity. As the direct representation of Babri Mosque became forbidden by political injunctions, they took recourse to the construction and preservation of other mosques through the scantiness materiality of construction using geometrical and arabesque patterns, ornamental and illegible writing, creating micro-gardens and courtyards, embellishing their houses, windows within which patterns of moons, stars, plant, and floral life became abundant. In many of these multifaceted iterations visible in central India, one can almost feel the presence of Babri and its ruins, even in its absence. How does one recreate sacred architecture and save it from demolition? For its recreation, one has to understand what the characteristics of this architecture are. In the Islamic form of worship, there is an emphasis on congregational prayers, which requires a spacious courtyard with a large prayer hall at its western end. In the rear wall of the prayer hall, the center is occupied by a recess called a mihrab and indicates the direction of the Qibla. To its right, a pulpit is meant for the Imam who leads the prayer. A tower or a minaret initially intended for the muezzin to call the faithful to the prayer. Lastly, a hawz, which in other words is a tank, must be provided for ablutions, usually in the courtyard of a mosque. Though materially, within its physical characteristics, it would be impossible to create a sacred architecture, I can achieve the possibility of it never being demolished again by creating an invisible architecture. Such a form requires concept or a formula that has to be presented in a way that can be sensed and experienced aesthetically. As I have realized how symbols and their manifestations shape our understanding of the experience of this architecture, in the documentation and preservation of symbols, I can establish this form of aesthetics, of grace and familiarity that can enforce unity and assert Islamic principles. Invisibility within the architecture's materiality will be a crucial factor in the creation of this architecture. What is there is not a subject to be studied, but what is not. Through invisibility, I can convey my thoughts and arguments in an easily comprehensible way to others. This way, I can stimulate creative thinking by encouraging the foolish to make unexpected connections, challenging their assumptions and preconceived notions, and evoking emotional response. Symbols within the articulations remove artificiality from nature, putting the fragments of the world together, creating a language that truly corresponds to the world.